take you to join a cult.
This fully reminds me of a story I read about a guy that joined a doomsday cult by accident. A few years ago, a guy, Alex, was studying law in Australia when he was approached by two men in suits on campus. They told him they needed to interview international students for a study they were doing. Alex does the study, and the guys are really nice, and Alex doesn't really have any friends on campus, so they ask him to coffee later, and he accepts. So on the day they're supposed to meet for coffee, the two guys end up bringing this, other woman along. And they're all hanging out, but she starts talking about these classes that she's been taking. She's raving about these classes, and the guys have also taken these classes, and they're like, Alex, you have to do these classes with us. So when he shows up to take the class with them, it turns out it's a 9-month commitment, and you have to go 3 times a week. Also, it's a full-on Bible study. But Alex was raised Christian, and he also doesn't want to lose these friends, so he's like, whatever, I'll take these classes with you. But then, a few months into these classes, his friends start saying weird things to him, like, oh, your parents are under the control of Satan, you should probably not talk to them anymore. Alex gets a weird vibe, he ends up Googling it, and it turns out he fully joined Shincheonji, which is a high-control religious group based in South Korea.
Took a bullet to the head in broad daylight while serving as the President of the United States. I am John F. Kennedy, and here is the account of the curse that befell my family. I was born in 1917 into a wealthy and influential family. My father, Joseph Kennedy, had grand ambitions for us, his children. However, shortly after I assumed the presidency as the 35th President of the United States, misfortune began to plague my family. My elder brother, Joseph Kennedy Jr., was killed during World War II. My sister Kathleen perished in a plane crash. And then came that fateful day in 1963, when I was assassinated in broad daylight in Dallas. But the curse did not end there. My brother Robert was assassinated in 1968 while campaigning for the presidency. My other brother Edward survived a plane crash in 1964, but was involved in a tragic car accident in 1969, resulting in the death of a young woman. And the list goes on. My nephew, John F. Kennedy Jr., lost his life in a plane crash in 1999. My sister Rosemary lived a tragic life after a lobotomy. The curse of the Kennedy family seems to have no end.
I don't understand how an argument over breadcrumbs can cause someone to do something so heinous to someone else. 35-year-old Dimitri Furcano stabbed his girlfriend, 28-year-old Erica Preti, to death after she called him out for leaving breadcrumbs on their hotel bed. In 2017, they were on vacation in San Teodoro when on one of those nights, Dimitri attacked Erica and stabbed her 57 times. Dimitri was originally sentenced to 30 years in prison, but what happened next, no one saw coming. You see, when Dimitri was sentenced in 2018, he weighed about 260 pounds. Then from 2022 to 2023, Dimitri gained 200 pounds and now weighs about 450 pounds. So because of his health and the horrible diet served in prison, Dimitri was recently released after only serving 5 years. The court ruled that the food in the prison could end up killing him, so he had to get out. And get this, Dimitri will serve the rest of his sentence under house arrest at his parents' home near Milan, where he can get access to a healthy diet. So this is a slap in the face to the victim's family. But keep in mind, this happened in Italy, so I'm guessing the laws over there are a little bit more lenient. So do you guys think his release was valid, or should he have been kept there for the remaining of his sentence?
Killed more than 33 young men. I was nicknamed the Killer Clown. My name is John Wayne Gacy. I had a particularly difficult childhood because of my father, who was a very violent and authoritarian man. At the age of 9, I was raped by a person I thought was my friend. I then left school very early and immediately joined the Navy. But I quickly stopped and changed several jobs. I even had my own construction company. And that's how I attracted young men, by promising them jobs before committing the worst. I also worked in a funeral home. I quickly took a liking to it, and this experience contributed to fuel my fascination for death and the macabre. I had 2 children in the meantime, and I got married. I was innocent and benevolent in appearance towards everyone, but unfortunately I had murderous impulses. To satisfy these impulses, I used my clown costume to sexually assault them, rape them, and bury my victims at home without anyone suspecting me of where my nickname of Killer Clown came from. This lasted for many years, until the police finally suspected me because of a foul smell reported by the neighbors. I was then arrested. I pretended that I was crazy and that everything I did was due to madness. But I was arrested in 1978 and sentenced to death in 1994. And that's how the nightmare I inflicted on many people ended.
You will genuinely never guess what happened after this man was kidnapped by armed, masked men. Rogelio Anderverdi was 34 and from Edinburgh, Texas. At 10:30 p.m. on the 1st of October 2013, a terrifying event would unfold. Rogelio was at home with his wife when suddenly two masked men with guns barged through the door. They dragged the man from the property and forced him into the back of a van. His wife was understandably hysterical and called police immediately as the masked men disappeared with her husband. Now, police officers headed out in force and even had a police helicopter scouring the area for any sign of him. However, they had no luck and police became suspicious as Rogelio had no criminal history or links to any gangs of any kind. After several hours, the search was called off. 2 days later, to his wife's shock, Rogelio walked through the door. He told her that his kidnappers had shown him mercy and simply set him free. Now, obviously, the police were following up on this case and they questioned him. Eventually, Rogelio had to tell the truth. He had staged a fake kidnapping between him and his friends so that he could go on a night out. He said that he simply wanted to spend time with his friends and party. He was eventually charged with making a false report to police and released on $5,000 bail.
That was the shocking footage of 21-year-old Angel Lynn being kidnapped in broad daylight by her boyfriend, Che Boskill. She was thrown inside the van and then driven down the A6, and at 60 miles an hour, she was pushed from the van and suffered a catastrophic head injury. She was found by a passerby and rushed to hospital. Angel suffered a fractured skull and a catastrophic brain injury, from which she might never recover. She was left unable to walk, talk, or feed herself. Che was arrested and charged with kidnap, coercive and controlling behaviour, and perverting the course of justice. It couldn't be proven that he'd pushed Angel from the van, and he received 7.5 years. This was later extended to 12 years. The driver of the van was also sentenced to 21 months. Angel, on the other hand, has a life sentence after doctors have told her mum that she's unlikely to ever recover from her brain injury. It's now a couple of years on and Angel's mum said she is able to communicate slightly. She still can't walk or talk, but uses a communication machine, and she can understand everything that's being said to her. When she puts her cheek against her daughter's lips, Angel purses her lips to give her a kiss. She hopes one day that she'll be able to communicate enough to tell everybody what actually happened on that fateful day.
This Derbyshire crime case is horrific. Police were called to a house in Killamarsh in 2021. It was 7:26 a.m. on the 19th of September. What they were told when they arrived stunned them. Outside was Damien Bendel. He chillingly told police that he'd murdered 4 people inside of the house. He was arrested at the scene and what officers discovered would haunt them. 35-year-old Terry Harris had lived in the house along with her children, 13-year-old John Paul Bennett and 11-year-old Lacey Bennett. Also deceased inside the property was Lacey's best friend, 11-year-old Connie Gent, who'd been there for a sleepover. Damien and Terry had been in a relationship after meeting on a dating website. Prior to the murders, and this is a massive trigger warning for animals here, Damien had bragged that a friend couldn't afford to take their dog to the vet, so he'd killed it using a brick. He was a known substance user and used a lot of CO and CA. On the day in question, the 4 victims were found deceased in a house with their skulls crushed. He had AR'd 11-year-old Lacey as she died. After the killings, he went to town to get more substances and was spotted on CCTV going to a shop to buy tobacco. He took John Paul's Xbox and traded it in for substances. When making polite conversation with Damien, a cab driver reported that he told him his night had been a bit mad. He was given a whole life order in prison and the house has since been demolished.
These are videos humans were never meant to see.
Okay, so we all remember the devastating tsunami that hit Japan on March 11th, 2011. But the footage I'm about to show you, you've probably never seen. This is super rare footage of the tsunami that day, and it's absolutely crazy. Just look how quick and destructive the water is. It's absolutely terrifying.
You'd never think that these are the faces of two 12-year-old killers, but that's exactly what they are. Jake Eakin and Evan Savoy were 12 years old and lived in the small town of Ephrata in Washington. They were described by parents as soft-spoken and nice boys. On February 15, 2003, they decided to go and call on another boy to see if he wanted to come out and play. Nobody could have predicted the horror that they were planning. Craig Sauger, 13, was at home with his mum when the two boys knocked on the door. His mum answered and was surprised to see them standing on the doorstep. Craig didn't get invited out to play much. He was on the spectrum and didn't really get included with the other boys. She happily let him go out to play but told him to come back before it got dark. As night fell, Craig's mum began to get worried and she decided to go out and look for her son. She called on Jake and Evan's parents and found that they were both already home. They said that they'd left Craig in the park and that he was going to walk home by himself. She headed to the park and to her horror, she found her son's lifeless body buried under a pile of leaves. She called for an ambulance, but it was already too late. Craig was dead. Jake and Evan's story was that Craig was climbing a tree when he fell. They freaked out and ran home and left him there by himself. The next day, after finding blood on the boy's shoes, the parents turned them into police. Craig's autopsy showed multiple stab wounds, 5 to his chest and torso, and 34 to his head and neck. Both of the 12-year-old boys were arrested and tried for Craig's murder. They were treated as adults in court due to the severity of the crime. They became the youngest murder defendants in the state to be tried as adults since 1931. Jake testified against Evan and said that it was him that had told Craig to bend down and count to 10 before dropping a massive rock on his neck. He then began stabbing him, and it was then that Jake joined in with the murder. Jake was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 14 years in prison. And Evan was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years. The shocking thing about this story is that both boys were released in 2020 and are now grown men and are married and living normal lives.
These are people who have gone missing in 2023.
This is Joshua Amos, who is 32 years old. He has been missing since March 19, 2023 after leaving a strip club in Washington Park, Illinois. His mother, Christine Simpson, said his disappearance is something that Joshua just wouldn't do. He was seen on video leaving Scarlet Strip Club on Berkman Road in Washington Park at 5 a.m. on March 19th. Surveillance cameras from a trucking company on Lincoln Avenue captured Joshua's image at 7:28 a.m. that day. The trucking company and the strip club are about 4 miles apart. Illinois State Police and a search dog looked for Joshua on March 24th, but nothing was ever found. His family and friends continue the search to this day, hoping they will find him ever since his disappearance. Up next is Jordan Taylor, and at 4:18 p.m. on January 6, 2023, Jordan Taylor, who is 29, changed his Facebook profile picture to a selfie of him wearing a white mask. Later that day, Jordan went to a barbershop located on Hillside Avenue in Queens, New York, and at 6:48 p.m. he abruptly left in the middle of his haircut, telling his barber that he had to go after receiving a phone call. Jordan was later seen standing outside of the barbershop for 5 to 10 minutes. Around 9 p.m. that same day, phone records show that Jordan went to the Port Authority bus terminal, where he seemingly spent some time up until midnight. On January 7, 2023, phone records tracked Jordan to a location near a club. Between 12:11 a.m. and 1:04 a.m., and around 2:30 a.m., Jordan was last seen on security footage walking by himself near Lower Manhattan. Jordan never returned home and hasn't been found or heard from since. On January 7th, his phone was found near that same club he was at 1:30 a.m. The authorities reviewed the video footage from outside the club he was at, but didn't see Jordan enter or exit the club at any point. And around 9 a.m., his wallet was found, which contained some cash and all of his credit cards. The police also found no evidence of foul play in Jordan's disappearance. His case is currently active and is still ongoing to this day. This might be one of the scariest things that can ever happen to a human, mainly because can you just imagine going missing and nobody ever finding you or talking to you again? I don't know, the thought about that is just terrifying, and hopefully they are found soon.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
you remember Mark and Debbie Constantino from the show Ghost Adventures? Well, they have a tragic story. Mark and Debbie Constantino were a couple for a long time and they gained notoriety as a ghost hunting couple. They were really good friends with the Ghost Adventures crew and thus they were invited out to be a part of episodes and investigations multiple times throughout the Ghost Adventures series. Here are some screenshots of their appearances on the show. Here's Debbie and here's Mark. They were constantly featured on Ghost Adventures and they were one of the couples that appeared all the time. People knew them. But there was trouble behind the scenes. They actually had a very abusive relationship and domestic violence was common between the two of them. Earlier in the year that Debbie was murdered, the police were called by Mark because apparently she had slashed him with a butcher knife, but she would never see court. Then just a week or so before the murders happened, Debbie actually called the police because Mark and the couple's daughter had pulled her out of a car, dragged her inside of a home, and beaten her to almost death. Debbie suffered a broken nose and she was afraid for her life, and Mark and his daughter were arrested. And since kidnapping is typically a no-bond charge, which means that you'll be held in jail until your trial, but a local judge made a tragic mistake and let Mark and his daughter out on bond. A week later, the police were called because a woman came home and found that one of her roommates was dead. And her other roommate, Debbie Constantino, Mark's wife, who had moved out of the family home, was missing. Police then tracked Mark's cell phone and found Debbie and Mark holed up inside of an apartment. There was a standoff with SWAT officers. Mark was threatening and yelling things out. And eventually, using explosives, the SWAT team blew open the door to the apartment where they found Debbie dead and Mark dead as well. He had murdered her and then took his own life. Obviously, this was huge news because the couple was on Ghost Adventures so frequently. They were mainstays at paranormal conventions. People knew their website and their work. And it made a lot of people question, was this some sort of darkness that was brought on by paranormal investigating? I personally don't think so. I think that it just had to do with some sort of mental illness and obviously deep issues with domestic abuse and all of that. But either way, it's such a tragic situation. But if you like true crime and you like murder stories, go listen to the podcast I co-host with my fiance, Murder in America. We just covered a brutal murder story from New Orleans, Louisiana, one of our favorite murder stories. The link is in my bio. You can listen for free on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And we've actually been trending lately. Thanks to everybody who's been listening and tuning in. We appreciate you all so much. And obviously that was a tragic story that I just told you guys. So RIP to Debbie Constantino and the other roommate who was killed, who still, I believe, remains unnamed.
This 19-year-old boy ate a slug and was then paralyzed for 8 years. This is 19-year-old rugby player from Sydney, Sam Ballard. And he contracted rat lungworm disease and spent 8 long years paralyzed before dying in November 2018. Sam Ballard was a promising 19-year-old rugby player and he was enjoying a weekend together with his friends in 2010 when he made a random decision that would prove fatal. All of them had a little bit of red wine that night, and his friend Jimmy Galvin said a typical garden slug crawled out in front of them. And in a moment of teenage stupidity, perhaps influenced by the wine, Sam Ballard was dared to eat the slug, and at first everything seemed fine. The friends carried on as usual. But within a few days' time, Sam began to complain of severe pain in his legs. Then he started vomiting and experiencing dizzy spells. When his conditions worsened and he fell weak, his mother rushed him to the hospital. Nobody could have predicted that that hospital visit would result in a 400-day-long coma that would paralyze Ballard for 8 years, and would end up eventually killing him. When they first arrived at the hospital, Sam Ballard's mother, Katie, feared that Sam might have multiple sclerosis, a condition that had affected his father, but doctors assured that that was not the case. Sam then turned to his mother and said that he had eaten a slug, and she said no one gets sick from that. But as it turned out, Sam Ballard had indeed gotten very, very sick from it. Sam Ballard had become infected with rat lungworm disease, a condition caused by a parasitic worm usually found in rodents, though it can transfer to slugs and snails if they eat the rodent's feces. And when Sam Ballard ate the live slug, it transferred to him. When a human ingests rat lungworm larvae, they penetrate the inner lining of the intestinal tract and work their way into the liver and lungs, then into the central nervous system. In most instances, rat lungworm disease causes only mild symptoms, if any, and most people who contract the illness recover within a matter of days or weeks. However, there are those rare instances where the symptoms are much more severe, and that was the case with Sam Ballard. According to the University of Hawaii, humans are a dead-end host for lungworms, meaning the parasites don't reproduce in humans, but they do get lost in the central nervous system, or even move into the eye chamber until they die. And the presence of these parasites can cause severe brain, spinal cord, and nerve damage. And in the case of Sam Ballard, this damage induced a coma that left him bound to a wheelchair and unable to eat without a tube. After Sam woke up from his 420-day-long coma, he was completely paralyzed and he now required 24-hour care 7 days a week. He was prone to seizures, unable to go to the bathroom without help or control his body temperature. He spent 3 years in the hospital before being released, just able to operate a motorized wheelchair. But unfortunately, the seemingly endless health complications Sam Ballard faced over the course of 8 years took their toll, and he sadly passed away in November 2018. And Sam Ballard's final words to his mother were, "I love you." This case of Sam Ballard is just extremely sad and honestly unlucky. From what was a harmless prank turned into a nightmare of a life for Sam Ballard. I feel so bad for him and his family, and may he rest in peace.
On the morning of August 26, 2015, a TV journalist and her cameraman were murdered by a gunman live on air. This is the tragic story of the murders of Allison Parker and Adam Ward. So Allison Parker and Adam Ward were employees of the CBS affiliate WDBJ in Roanoke, Virginia. They had both been working for the news station for a number of years, and tragically, Adam Ward actually graduated from Virginia Tech. If you don't remember, Virginia Tech was the site of one of the largest school shootings in American history. On that morning, Allison and Adam were covering a story about the 50th anniversary of a lake. At the time, they were interviewing a woman named Vicki Gardner talking about the upcoming plans for celebration. As Allison was conducting the interview, though, a man approached from behind. This man quickly brandished a pistol, and in the actual news footage, you can hear the sound of about 8 shots firing, followed by Allison screaming and the camera shot going dead. They then cut back to the actual people in the studio, and they were confused. They said, "Oh, we don't know what that was. Maybe it was a car backfiring or some shots fired in the background, but we'll get back to them in a second." What they didn't know, though, was that when Adam Ward dropped the camera, they caught this image of the shooter. And shockingly, people knew who he was. This is Vester Lee Flanagan II, the murderer behind these atrocious murders, and he himself was a TV reporter. Vester Flanagan had actually been employed by the same TV station that Allison and Adam worked at, even though when he was hired, he decided to go by the professional name of Bryce Williams. In the past, he had been involved with lawsuits with other broadcasting agencies, and people who had worked with Vester in the past knew him to be a volatile and somewhat dangerous individual. And that led to the year 2013, when Vester was fired from the news station that Allison and Adam worked at. He had been there less than a year, but other employees reported feeling extremely uncomfortable around him. On the day that he was fired, Vester didn't take the news so well, and when he was told he was being let go, he lashed out at employees and got violent. The police then had to escort Vester out of the building, and it's been reported that future victim Adam Ward actually videotaped this whole thing going down, and that later in the day, Adam and Vester got into a heated argument. So back to the shooting. After that eerie footage was broadcast, people began to worry about Allison and Adam. And when the police were called to the scene, they discovered that they both were dead. Vicki Gardner, the woman that was interviewed, was actually alive, and she was able to relate everything that had happened to the police. Like I said, when people from the news station went back and looked through that live broadcast footage, they recognized the man as Vester Flanagan. And thus, a massive statewide manhunt began for this guy. Authorities were also able to tell that he was the shooter because he had uploaded that eerie first-person perspective clip of him committing the murders to his Facebook at around 11 a.m. that morning. So the police tracked Vester down, they found the rental car that he had rented, and after a high-speed pursuit, he took his own life in the vehicle. Vester, before his death, had actually sent a letter to the news station, and in the letter, he talked about how he was sick of racial discrimination and sexual harassment in the workplace. He felt that he was so angry from the Charleston church shooting that he wanted to do something, and he even claimed that he admired people like Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris from Columbine. So obviously, this guy was messed up in the head. He was a disgruntled ex-employee who was fed up with what he saw as the ways of the world, and that led him to commit an atrocious act of violence. Now, I don't recommend you looking up the footage of this happening, but it is out there, and the news stations actually posted some of this back in the day when it all went down. Rest in peace to Allison Parker and Adam Ward, obviously, and I think that this is going to go down in history as one of the strangest murders to ever happen in America.
This case made me terrified to go to the cinema. This is the case of the horror in Screen 9. James Holmes was raised in California. His mum was a nurse and his dad was a scientist. From a young age, he was experiencing night terrors and allegedly actually tried to take his own life when he was just 11 years old. He was apparently obsessed with guns and weapons and had dreamed of becoming a mass murderer. Between May and July 2012, he legally bought 4 guns. Background checks were conducted and he was allowed the weapons. He also bought spike strips, which, if you don't know, pop the tyres of cars if they chase after you. On July the 19th, just hours before tragedy would unfold, James mailed his notebook to his psychiatrist. Inside the notebook, James detailed his plans to kill. The notebook was actually discovered later on undelivered. Just prior to entering a cinema in Aurora, James rang a crisis line to tell them about his plans to kill. However, the call was disconnected after just 9 seconds. At the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises, CCTV captures James walking into the cinema. He walks into screen 9, props open the door, and then walks back out again. Shockingly, he goes to his car and gets guns out and gas canisters. He re-entered the screen at about 12:38 PM and set off 2 gas canisters. When he entered screen 9 again, he immediately opens fire on the audience, instantly killing 10 people. 2 others later died in hospital from their injuries. An additional 70 people were injured. This was an absolutely packed out cinema. James also shot at people as they scrambled to exit the screen. His youngest victim was a 6-year-old girl. Witnesses said this all unfolded as there was actually a gunfight on the screen, and initially they all thought it was special effects and just part of the film. Police were actually on the scene very quickly after the first 911 call. James surrendered to the police and was arrested in the car park. He was apparently very calm when he was arrested and told police that he had booby-trapped his apartment. When police investigated his apartment, this was found out to be true. He was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences. This is the UK's most famous missing boy. In September 2007, Andrew Gosden was just 14 years old. He was a very intelligent boy and was top of his class in most classes at school. He was an introvert that usually spent most of his time at home. The day before Andrew went missing seemed completely normal. He went to school, he had some tea, and then he watched some TV. However, on September the 14th, he seemed more irritable than normal. Instead of getting the bus to school that morning like his parents thought he was, he went to a cash point and withdrew £200. CCTV then captures him walking home, where he changed his clothes into a Slipknot t-shirt. When he left the house, he didn't take his charger with him, and he also didn't take £100 that he'd saved up. He didn't take his passport, but he did take his house key, which indicates he was going to come home. He bought a one-way ticket to London and was last seen leaving King's Cross station at about 11:30. Frustratingly, the school had actually tried to contact Andrew's parents to say that he hadn't turned up to school that day, but they dialed the wrong number and left an answer phone message on the wrong phone. His family was completely cleared of any suspicion, and the family and the school and all of the students went to London and they were handing out loads of flyers. Weirdly, a year after this incident, a man came to a police station to say that he had information about Andrew. Now, the police station was unmanned, so the person spoke to this man just over an intercom system and sent a police officer down there. Mysteriously, by the time the police officer arrived, the person had vanished. This is what Andrew might look like now, just being the age that he may be if he's still alive. Theories about this case is that he may have gone to London to meet up with someone or go to a concert. Was he lured there by somebody with bad intentions, or was he just going there for the day, gonna come back, and was at the wrong place at the wrong time and somebody did something bad to him? In 2009, the family paid for a search of the River Thames to try and find some sort of closure. The search did find a body, but it wasn't Andrew's. The most up-to-date information that we have on this case is that 2 men were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping Andrew, but they've actually been released.